U.S. Marines called the old veteran a decrepit sniper, but one shot from 2,900 meters shocked everyone. An old man walks onto a Marine firing range carrying what looks like a pistol, held together with duct tape and prayers. The young sergeant takes one look at this decrepit weapon and the weathered hands holding it and decides he's found the day's entertainment. Mock the confused geezer until he leaves. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. The California desert sun hammered down on Marine Corps range with a kind of relentless heat that made even experienced Marines question their career choices. But Sergeant Marcus Decker barely noticed the temperature as he supervised his squad's pistol qualification training. At 28, Decker embodied everything the modern Corps valued: aggressive confidence, technical proficiency, and the kind of swagger that came from believing his generation represented the pinnacle of military evolution. "Tighten that grouping, Harrison," Decker barked at one of his Marines who had just fired a mediocre qualifying string. "This is supposed to be the world's finest fighting force, not a retirement home shooting club." The assembled Marines, 6 young men ranging from 19 to 24, laughed at their sergeant's joke while adjusting their stances at the firing line. Their weapons were pristine service pistols, their technique was textbook perfect, and their attitude suggested they believed themselves to be the culmination of 200 years of Marine Corps excellence. It was into this atmosphere of youthful arrogance that Silas Croft walked, carrying something wrapped in faded cloth that immediately drew the attention of every Marine on the range. Silas appeared to be in his mid-70s, his weathered face showing decades of sun exposure that had left his skin the color of old leather. His blue eyes held the kind of calm steadiness that suggested he had seen enough in his life to be surprised by nothing and intimidated by no one. When Silas unwrapped the cloth to reveal his weapon, several of the young Marines actually laughed out loud. What he held was technically a pistol, specifically what appeared to be a heavily modified version of a large caliber handgun, but its condition suggested it had been assembled from salvage parts and held together through determination rather than proper engineering. The weapon's finish was almost completely worn away, showing bare metal underneath decades of handling. The grip was wrapped in what appeared to be electrical tape, and the barrel showed modifications that looked homemade rather than professionally manufactured. Most striking was the scope mounted on top, an unusual optical device that seemed too sophisticated for such a beat-up weapon. Sergeant Decker walked toward Silas with a kind of aggressive stride that suggested he was about to deliver entertainment for his squad. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your range authorization and have our armorer inspect that, whatever that is you're carrying." Silas's expression remained neutral as he withdrew a laminated range pass from his pocket and held it out without comment. Decker examined it with obvious skepticism, expecting to find some irregularity that would justify ordering this elderly civilian off his range. "This pass shows you're authorized for long-range sniper sections," Decker announced with barely concealed mockery. "Sir, I think there's been some administrative error. The long-range area is for precision rifle training, not for civilians with pistols that looked like they were assembled in a garage." Private Martinez, one of the younger Marines, couldn't suppress his laughter at the sight of the elderly man's weapon. "Sarge, that thing looks like it would explode if you actually tried to fire it. Is that duct tape holding the grip together?" Silas's calm expression didn't change, despite the mockery. "The tape covers the pressure sensor. The weapon functions perfectly well." This response triggered another round of laughter from the Marines, who interpreted the mention of a pressure sensor on such a decrepit weapon as either confusion or deliberate fabrication. Decker felt his confidence growing as he sensed an opportunity to demonstrate leadership through putting this presumptuous civilian in his place. "Mr." Decker paused to check the name on the range pass. "Mr. Croft, I don't know what fantasy you're living in, but that scrap metal you're calling a weapon wouldn't pass safety inspection at a post-apocalyptic firing range. Why don't you head over to the Veterans Center where they serve coffee and donuts? That's more age-appropriate than trying to keep up with active-duty Marines." The public humiliation was calculated to amuse Decker's squad while establishing his authority over someone who clearly didn't understand that modern military facilities weren't places for elderly hobbyists to indulge nostalgic fantasies about their distant military service. Silas absorbed the insults without visible reaction, his weathered hands holding the battered weapon with obvious familiarity, despite its decrepit appearance. "I was invited to shoot at the long-range targets. My authorization is valid." Decker's irritation intensified at Silas's quiet persistence. "Long-range targets? Sir, those positions are at 3,000 meters, designed for precision rifles that cost more than most cars. You're holding what appears to be a garage project held together with hope and tape. There's no possible way you have legitimate authorization to shoot at distances that challenge our best-equipped snipers." Sergeant Decker sensed an opportunity to create a memorable lesson for his Marines about the difference between delusional elderly civilians and the reality of modern military capability. The fact that this old man with his pathetic weapon had somehow obtained legitimate range authorization suggested bureaucratic error rather than genuine qualification, and Decker decided to expose that error in a way his Marines would remember and repeat in their barracks conversations. "Tell you what, Mr. Croft," Decker announced with theatrical magnanimity, "I'm going to give you a fair chance to prove that weapon of yours actually functions. We'll set up a target at 300 meters. That's well within pistol range for someone who claims to have authorization for long-distance shooting." The challenge was designed to be impossible while appearing generous. 300 meters represented an extreme distance for handgun accuracy, far beyond what most expert shooters could achieve, even with modern competition pistols under ideal conditions. For an elderly man with a weapon that looked like it might disintegrate upon firing, hitting such a target would require miraculous luck. "Here's the deal," Decker continued, playing to his audience of grinning Marines. "You hit that target, anywhere on the paper, I'm not even requiring center mass, and you can shoot at whatever range positions you want for the rest of the day. You miss, and you pack up your museum piece and head back to wherever you came from. Sound fair?" Several of the young Marines exchanged amused glances, recognizing this as theater designed to teach lessons about respecting modern military standards while providing entertainment at the expense of someone who clearly didn't understand how outmatched he was. Silas studied Decker with an expression that seemed to evaluate the young sergeant and find him significantly lacking in ways that Decker couldn't begin to comprehend. 300 meters with one shot? That's right, Decker confirmed. One shot to prove your weapon works and you know how to use it. Shouldn't be a problem for someone who claims to have authorization for 3,000 meters shooting. Private Harrison raised his hand tentatively. Sarge, 300 meters with a pistol is basically impossible. Even with competition equipment, hitting that distance requires— I'm aware of the technical challenges, Harrison. Decker interrupted. That's exactly the point. If Mr. Croft here has a legitimate reason to be on our range with his homemade weapon, he should be able to demonstrate basic capability. If he can't make this shot, we'll know his range pass was issued by someone who didn't understand what they were authorizing. Silas walked toward the firing line while the Marines set up a standard target at 300 meters, a distance that looked impossibly far for pistol engagement to everyone except the elderly man who began preparing his weapon with movements that suggested decades of muscle memory. The battered pistol looked even more absurd when held in firing position, its taped grip and worn finish creating an image that seemed to mock the precision equipment used by the surrounding Marines. But Silas's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he checked the weapon's mechanisms and made subtle adjustments to the unusual scope mounted on top. "Anytime you're ready, Mr. Croft," Decker announced. "Remember, one shot to prove you belong here. Miss, and you're done for the day." It was at that moment, just as Silas was settling into his firing stance, that a voice cut across the range with enough authority to make every Marine freeze in place. "Sergeant Decker! What the hell is going on at my range?" General Robert Vance strode toward the firing line with the kind of purposeful anger that made even experienced sergeants question their recent decisions. At 58, Vance commanded the entire base and rarely personally intervened in range operations unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. His presence at what should have been routine pistol qualification suggested someone had made a serious mistake. Sergeant Decker snapped to attention, his confident swagger evaporating as he struggled to explain a situation that suddenly felt far more complicated than simple harassment of an elderly civilian with delusions about his shooting capabilities. "Sir, we have a civilian on the range with questionable equipment and authorization. I was conducting a capability assessment to determine whether his range pass was issued in error." General Vance ignored Decker's explanation entirely and walked directly toward Silas with focused attention that transformed the casual range atmosphere into something approaching a formal ceremony. When he reached the elderly man, Vance came to perfect attention and rendered the most formal military salute that any of the young Marines had ever witnessed. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft," Vance said with unmistakable respect, "it is an honor to have you at my range, sir." The use of rank, specifically the highest enlisted position in the Marine Corps, sent a shock through the assembled Marines who had been laughing at this confused civilian just moments earlier. Decker felt his stomach drop as he realized that the elderly man he had been publicly humiliating was not only a veteran, but apparently someone whose service record warranted personal recognition from a general officer. Silas returned the salute with movements that seemed to shed decades from his frame, revealing glimpses of the Marine he had been during his years of service. General Vance, thank you for the invitation to test the weapon. I appreciate the opportunity to see if the old girl still has it in her. Vance turned toward the assembled Marines with expression that mixed fury and professional disappointment. I want everyone here to understand who Master Gunnery Sergeant Silas Croft is, and why his presence on this range represents an extraordinary privilege that Sergeant Decker apparently decided to treat as an opportunity for entertainment. The general's voice carried across the range with clarity that ensured every word would be remembered by the Marines, who were rapidly understanding they had witnessed catastrophic failure of judgment by their sergeant. Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft served with distinction in Special Operations Forces, including extended deployments with reconnaissance units that conducted some of the most classified missions in Marine Corps history. He helped establish the training protocols and operational procedures that eventually became the foundation for our current Special Operations Forces. Vance gestured toward the battered weapon in Silas's hands. That pistol you've all been mocking is called Nomad. It's a unique weapon that was custom-built specifically for Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft and represents engineering capabilities that don't exist anywhere else in the world. The revelation that the decrepit-looking weapon had significance beyond its appearance created stunned silence among the Marines who had been laughing at its condition just minutes earlier. The tape on the grip isn't holding it together, Vance continued. It's covering advanced sensors that feed targeting data to that scope you thought looked homemade. The worn finish isn't neglect. It's the result of decades of use under conditions that would destroy conventional weapons. And the modifications you dismissed as garage tinkering represent innovations that influenced the development of specialized equipment throughout our special operations community. General Vance walked closer to Silas and gestured toward the weapon that had been the source of so much mockery. Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft, would you be willing to explain to these young Marines what makes Nomad special? I think they need to understand exactly what they've been dismissing. Silas held up the battered pistol, and for the first time since arriving at the range, he spoke with voice that carried authority earned through decades of operational experience. This weapon was built 27 years ago as a gift from a Saudi prince after a classified operation that I'm still not authorized to discuss in detail. The base is a standard large-caliber pistol frame, but almost everything else has been custom manufactured. He pointed to components that the Marines had dismissed as evidence of poor maintenance. The loose tolerances you see in the slide mechanism aren't wear. They're engineered specifically to allow the weapon to function in extreme temperature ranges and desert conditions that would jam conventional pistols. The barrel has been custom rifled with a twist rate that stabilizes specially manufactured ammunition at distances that standard pistols can't achieve. Silas traced his finger along the grip where electrical tape concealed what he now revealed to be sophisticated electronics. The pressure sensors measure exactly how I'm gripping the weapon and feed that data to micro adjustments in the scope that compensate for any variation from optimal hold. The scope itself links to atmospheric sensors that calculate wind speed air pressure, temperature, and humidity to provide targeting solutions that most sniper rifles can't match. Private Martinez raised his hand tentatively. Sir, even with advanced technology, pistols have fundamental limitations in accuracy at extreme distances due to barrel length and projectile velocity. How can any handgun compete with precision rifles at long range? Good question, Silas acknowledged. The answer is in the ammunition and the shooter's capability. Standard pistol rounds can't achieve what I need, so Nomad fires custom manufactured cartridges that are essentially scaled down rifle rounds optimized for this specific barrel length and rifling pattern. Each round is hand-loaded to exact specifications and costs more than most rifles. General Vance added context that made the young Marines understand they were witnessing something genuinely extraordinary. Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft worked with weapons engineers and ballistics experts to develop both the weapon and its ammunition. The result is a system that can achieve accuracy at ranges that shouldn't be possible for a pistol, but only when fired by someone with the training and experience to use it properly. The weapon is called Nomad, Vance continued, because it accompanied Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft on operations across multiple continents over a 15-year period. It's been fired in deserts, jungles, mountains, and urban environments, and it's never failed when properly maintained, despite appearance that suggests it's falling apart. Silas smiled slightly at the description. The tape gets replaced regularly. The finish wore off decades ago, but the internal mechanisms are maintained with precision that most armorers would consider obsessive. This weapon has saved my life on 7 separate occasions that I can discuss, and several more that remain classified. Sergeant Decker stood frozen, his face pale, as he processed the magnitude of his error in judgment. He had mocked a legendary weapon, humiliated a master gunnery sergeant, and demonstrated to his own Marines that he valued appearances over substance and swagger over wisdom. Now then, General Vance said, his tone shifting from educational to challenging, Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft, Sergeant Decker proposed a test at 300 meters. Would you be interested in demonstrating what Nomad can actually do? Silas looked toward the distant targets with expression that suggested he was considering something far more ambitious than the sergeant's modest challenge. General, with your permission, I'd like to shoot at the 2,900-meter target. I want to see if the old calibration still holds after all these years. The statement created absolute silence on the range as every Marine processed what they had just heard. 2,900 meters, nearly 3 kilometers, represented an extreme distance that challenged the best sniper rifles with the most advanced optics. The suggestion that a pistol could engage such targets seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics and ballistics. Word spread rapidly, and within 20 minutes, over 40 Marines gathered to witness Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft attempt the impossible, a pistol shot at 2,900 meters. Silas settled behind a sandbag rest, withdrawing a single custom cartridge that looked nothing like standard ammunition. He loaded it carefully, made minute scope adjustments, then sat motionless for 5 minutes with eyes closed, sensing atmospheric conditions technology couldn't measure. When his eyes opened, the patient elderly man was gone, replaced by focused intensity that made experienced Marines recognize operational capability. The shot was louder than expected, Nomad's report echoing like artillery, with visible flame from the muzzle. Then came waiting, 10, 20, 30 seconds of absolute silence. Then, faintly but unmistakably, the metallic ping of supersonic projectiles striking steel echoed from 2,900 meters away. Perfect center hit. The range erupted in spontaneous applause. Sergeant Decker approached and dropped to one knee. Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft, I was wrong about everything. I apologize for my disrespect and arrogance. Silas placed his hand on Decker's shoulder. Stand up, Sergeant. Pride is a heavy burden. The important thing is learning when to set it down. You're young enough to learn if you choose wisdom over ego. As Marines crowded around with questions, Silas quietly packed his equipment. The story of the impossible shot spread throughout the Marine Corps, becoming oral history, connecting generations through shared values about recognizing greatness, regardless of appearance, and respecting those whose service established the foundations upon which current Marines stood.